Okay, our speaker tonight is Jim Lively. He's going to be talking about oil and water don't mix, the threat of an Enbridge pipeline in the Mackinac Strait. So I'll let him take over.
All right, thanks, Roger. Hello, my name is Jim Lively. I'm program director at the Michigan Land Use Institute. We're a statewide organization, but we're based in Traverse City. And I am here to talk to you about an issue that I didn't know anything about. I think it was maybe 8 months ago when I first learned that there was a pipeline in the Great Lakes and under the Straits of Mackinac. How many of you knew about this before, say, 6 or 8 months ago? Okay, we got one. That's pretty good. I thought there might be one or two. So this, I want to do a few things tonight. One is just kind of tell you the story about how I and a lot of us, many of you that are here, came to learn about this and just kind of tell the story of what we've done so far and how we have begun to raise awareness about it. Then I want to talk a little bit about what I do know. I'm a relatively new, I'm no real expert, but I have been learning a lot about this over the last several months. So I'll try to do my best to explain what I do know about the pipelines and the risk, both the local risk, the risk to the straits, but I think we also have to at least understand a lot more about this pipeline system that the Mackinac line, that pipeline is a part of. So we'll try to talk about both the macro scale and the local issue. And then talk a little bit about the organizing efforts that are going on right now. What are the organizations doing? What are we doing about this? And how can we all get involved? It's a pretty new issue. So a lot of organizations are still coming up to speed, are learning about it. So this is not a well-formulated campaign plan. You're kind of here. This is the first time I've given this talk, other than basically having been at the rally that we helped organize last summer. So I'm just mostly going to tell a couple stories, tell you where we are, and then hopefully we can get into a dialogue and you can ask a lot of questions. But I guess I'll start with the story of how I learned about this and how our organization, the Michigan Land Use Institute, learned about it. And I'll go back about 5 years. We are involved in 3 different broad program areas. We work a lot on food and farm issues, especially in Northwest Lower Michigan. We work a lot on smart growth issues, and we work on clean energy issues. And about 5 years ago, we brought a guy by the name of Bill McKibben to Traverse City. Bill McKibben, how many of you know who Bill McKibben is? I'll bet many. He's a pretty well-known author. He's now one of the leading climate change activists in the world. And at that time, he was just starting his global organization called 350.org. He kind of was in Traverse City and was announcing it because nobody had heard of 350.org and what 350 meant. But basically, it was his approach to addressing the climate change issue. 350 is the parts per million that is recommended of CO2 in the atmosphere to keep the climate essentially where it's always been, or at least in recorded history. Of course, we just exceeded 400, so we're not doing such a good job at staying at 350. But McKibben came to Traverse City and was talking about the threats of climate change, and we were all pretty energized by his message and his activism. But climate change hasn't been a great local organizing issue. There's a lot of folks that are really concerned about climate, but there's a lot of other folks that don't want to talk about it. A lot of folks, I think most folks probably are on board with it, but they recognize that it can be a volatile issue, and what do you do about it in your own backyard? Is it enough to change a light bulb? So we, as an organization, at least I'm speaking now for the Michigan Land Use Institute, really didn't get involved in climate organizing, but got more involved in energy efficiency organizing in our community from the Traverse City area and promoting renewables. We also have been involved in fighting coal plants, which we know you can't just work on the solutions, you also have to stop the bad stuff. So it was in that context of knowing Bill McKibben that I got a call last winter from an activist who had been at the Bill McKibben rally and said, hey, McKibben is now organizing what he's describing as the largest climate rally ever held to be held in Washington, D.C. at the mall in February. And these people said, boy, we're trying to organize a bus. It would sure help if you guys, Michigan Land Use Institute, would help get behind this. So I kind of got guilted into helping to organize a busload of folks to travel to this climate rally in Washington, D.C., which we filled a bus, got about 60 people to ride all night on a bus in February, get off the bus in the morning, walk around the mall, wait for this rally to start. We're all shivering. It was a fabulous rally. You know, I think they said about 50,000 people were there. We were fortunate. We brought about 25 high school kids with us, which made it extra fun because a lot of these kids had never been to Washington, and so they were just blown away by the whole thing. And we did a march to the White House, and mostly that rally was about Keystone XL. That pipeline issue has been a major rallying cry for climate groups because they see this as a major investment, you know, financial and political investment in tar sands oil, which is one of the most polluting sources of carbon that we could possibly burn, really right after coal, and just about as bad as coal. So the climate groups have been fighting the Keystone XL pipeline, and there we are shivering on the mall with these high school kids and 50,000 other people, and we're listening to Bill McKibben say, this coming summer, we're going to encourage all of you to do rallies in your hometowns in climate rallies, and especially about the Keystone XL pipeline. So our little group of activists get back on the bus, ride all night home, and everybody's all charged up and said, well, what are we going to do? We need to do a rally about Keystone XL. And as we talked about, how do you rally people in northern Michigan about the Keystone XL pipeline, we realized it's going to be pretty hard to get people to get that many people to get that charged up. And it was right around then that somebody said, you know, I think we got some pipelines here in Michigan. Didn't we have a pipeline rupture in the Kalamazoo River? Like, yeah, we'd all heard of that. That was tar sands oil ruptured in the Kalamazoo River near Marshall, Michigan. And then somebody else, I think it was somebody in our organization, said, I think I'd read a report about a pipeline under the Mackinac Straits. And that was a report that came out a year ago, and I stuck a copy over there. Somebody must have grabbed it, which is all right, but I got another copy here. Oops. It was called Sunken Hazard, and the National Wildlife Federation did this report. And it was essentially about the pipeline that none of us had really ever heard of or paid attention to that exists under the Mackinac Straits. So once we learned that there was our own pipeline threatening one of the most, iconic, beautiful places in Michigan, place that everybody that is in Michigan understands the value of the Mackinac Straits, we knew we had a rally. We knew we had an event. And so that was essentially how we came to this idea of, it was about April or May, that we should do something at the Mackinac Straits in July to raise awareness about this pipeline. And we contacted the 350.org group and said, hey, McKibben told us we should be doing these events. Do you think we could get him here? And sure enough, they said, yeah, we can put that on his schedule. So we get Bill McKibben, which we thought was a pretty big deal, to come to St. Ignace. We get the woman that authored this report, who was just thrilled to death that people were actually paying attention to the fact that there was a pipeline under the Straits, a woman by the name of Beth Wallace, who works for the National Wildlife Federation. So she agreed to be a keynote speaker, as well as Bill McKibben. And then we talked to the folks from the Kalamazoo River where the spill had occurred and said, we need to hear about what happened. It was just 3 years ago. Tell us your story. And we also contacted some folks in Detroit, because as you start to learn about these pipelines, the pipeline that goes to Detroit, the one that ruptured in the Kalamazoo River, is carrying tar sands. And when they refine that stuff in Detroit, they create something called petroleum coke, which is almost like coal. And they have these huge piles of pet coke, as it's called, on the shores of the Detroit River, right in Detroit. And there was dust blowing all over, and the neighbors were quite up in arms. It's been quite a mess. So we wanted those folks to tell their story about what the impact of these pipelines were. And then we found a bunch of musicians, and it turned into kind of a fun afternoon. So I think what I'll do to just kind of put you all in that moment, because that was kind of a galvanizing, organizing moment, is I'll just show about a 5-minute video from the rally, and then we'll start to talk a little bit more about one of the things that was fun about it was how quick it all came together. It was about 6 weeks from the idea, maybe 8 weeks, until we actually had it happen. And there was a lot of logistics, including, planning an event about an hour and a half from where most of us that were organizing it live. So, it was pretty cool. All right, let's try it again.
When we have a threat to the world's greatest source of fresh water, we the people must rise.
People who've never seen the Great Lakes have no idea. And you have to kind of start with the basics with them, that you can't see across them. That is 20% of the surface fresh water on the planet.
Oh, I always heard about these straits and about Mackinac Island and this long bridge, and so the startling thing was how incredibly blue it was. It felt like we'd come to the Caribbean almost. And then to learn that there are big pipelines, right? Just because that was the cheapest way to go would be to stick them under the lake. I mean, cheapest way to go for Enbridge, but think about what would happen to the economy of this whole region if one of those sprung a leak. Oddly enough, most people don't want to go vacation in an oil slick,
I want to first give people a background on Enbridge and their history. I just want to lay out the groundwork here for why we are concerned about this pipeline. November 1999, Crystal Falls, 226,000 gallons spilled out of Line 5. 2002, Lakehead System, 200,000 gallons spilled in 250,000, 21,000 gallons spilled in Bay. Another in Bay County, 4,200. 2007, 50,000. In February, 201,000. July 2010, Marshall, Michigan, 1 million gallons approximately. And Enbridge said at that time they can detect a leak instantaneously. 17 hours passed before someone with a utility company told them that they had spilled 1 million gallons.
We had tar sands oil floating, and it went to the Kalamazoo River, covered 35 to 40 miles. What everyone learned about tar sands oil was that it floats first. Then the benzene burns off into the air. As that burned off, tar sands oil got heavy, and it began to sink. We still have 180,000 gallons of this thicker sort of peanut butter mayonnaise, if you will, tar sands oil on the bottom of the river. They're still learning about how hard it is to clean up the oil.
It's just very critical that this company be held to the absolute highest standards.
I'd never heard of petcoke until March, when we started seeing these mounds 3 stories high of this black coal-like substance piling up on the banks of the Detroit River. This petcoke is a direct byproduct of tar sands refinement. This refinery is causing the surrounding communities to be the 3rd most polluted zip code in the country. We looked and we said, we must challenge this. Detroit Coalition Against Tar Sands and other folks came, and we linked arms. And we stood in front of these dump trucks and said that you shall not move the people until you move petcoke.
Of course, we're all connected to the damage at the other end of the pipe, because when this stuff doesn't spill, when it makes its way down these pipes and into refineries and gets turned into gasoline and gets burned, then it spills into the atmosphere. That happens every single day. We've spilled so much carbon into the atmosphere in the last 200 years that we've raised the temperature of the Earth about 1 degree. If we're not able to slow down this move toward things like tar sands, then the scientists tell us that 1 degree will be 4 or 5 degrees. We gotta save the Great Lakes not just from oil spills, we gotta save them from carbon spills.
Superstorms, huge tornadoes. These things, our Earth Mother is telling us, I've had enough. When will we listen?
Enbridge bypassed a very important environmental permit for expansion, and they have increased the capacity. They have done no safety improvements to this pipeline whatsoever. All they've done is flipped a switch, turned up more horsepower, and they're now pumping 2.1 million gallons of oil per day, more than before. For this particular pipeline, Line 5, which is 60 years old, we really want people to encourage our regulators, especially Snyder, the governor, to make a replacement of this pipeline. No expansion whatsoever, full replacement. And then we want him to say absolutely no tar sands whatsoever. Never tar sands.
We all have to look inside our heart and our soul and say, what are we called to do? I say we are called, as the temperature, as we heard earlier, rises, and the tides rise, that we, the people, must also rise.
So the good news is that we know what we need to do to stop this. The technology is no secret, it's just we have to put it to use. I'm starting to think we may actually win this big fight. And if I was the Koch brothers, and if I was Exxon, and if I was Enbridge, I'd be scared. They've been left alone for a very long time. And looking at you all here today, it's very clear they will be left alone no longer. This fight is on, and you guys are a huge part of it. Thank you so much.
How are you, everybody? Go look at it. Thank you very much. Go to either the oilandwaterdon'tmix.com website or go to mlui.org/petition, and you can sign the petition to Governor Schneider. These are the kind of things that we need to do, that we can do, and we must do.
All right, cool. I'm glad we got it working. Thanks for your patience. So, how many of you that were there what were your impressions, just real quick, of that rally? Anybody want to share their? Yeah.
Bob Dunn from Lachino. I was there. I got there about 2 o'clock. I think it started at noon. And unfortunately, the thing broke up about 3:30, and I was pretty disappointed. It looked like a nice group of protesters that were sharing a feeling that this was bad. There were a couple pipes. I saw the 20-inch diameter pipes there, and they had music. They had Daisy May and Seth Bernard and some others. I missed that, and I wish it had gone into the evening.
Well, it was hot, for one thing. I don't know if you were there. We started at noon. We knew we were bringing we brought buses actually from Green Bay, Wisconsin, also from Ann Arbor, from Kalamazoo. So we had folks traveling quite a distance, and so we worked kind of hard to plan it in the middle of the day and get people out of there. So apologize for that, but yeah, you had a...
Yeah, I'm Diane Meyer. I live here in the Sioux, and I was impressed with the number of people that came forward and joined in, and the energy and all the different groups, people who've been involved in this. And I had the feeling that people would do more, do whatever they could. And I was proud to see Cecil Pavlot there, who lives
You
here.
must know Cecil,
Yeah. And meet friends that I know from downstate who came. And I did want to mention, I've seen this film before, and some email that I got showed that they now have a film under the straits. You would know about that. You're going to show it.
Show it here in a second. Yeah,
Good, because it shows the pipeline and what condition they're in.
Yeah.
And
So we can get it to work.
and I just feel like people need to speak up and get involved. If they don't, you lose.
Yeah.
And we'd like to see people get involved here.
All right. Well, it was a cool day, and again, hot day, but very cool in the sense of a lot of great people showed up. About 400 people. The energy was good, and I guess it is important, really, because I do organizing around different issues. But this one has come together really quickly. Like I said at the beginning, 8 months ago, I didn't even know there was a pipeline. This has been 4 months since we did this rally, and there are things going on, but also, as you know, these kinds of things you don't unfortunately change them as quickly as you'd like. So we'll talk about what we're doing, or what is going on, and how we can continue to stay together. I think what I'd like to do next is just spend a little bit of time talking about the pipelines themselves, and kind of what is the threat, what is the context of what's happening. Again, to the best of my ability, I am not a pipeline expert. Now, what happened here? I lost my My link, I wanted to pull that map up of the pipelines, which is in this report. Here we go. I think you might be able to leave the lights up, Roger. Let's just see. So this report, again, was done by National Wildlife Federation just a year ago. That's the one I want to show. You can get this online. I didn't bring a bunch of copies because I didn't feel like printing a whole bunch, but it's worth looking at. It really lays out a lot of the issue, and I think it's important to kind of start with understanding the pipeline system that we have here and what's going on. And you heard a lot in that video about tar sands, which are coming out of Alberta, Canada. Up here, this is Alberta. That's where they're mining tar sands, this oil, goopy oil that they found in right near the surface, and they just pull it out. It's in sand. It looks like tar, and they're adding, diluting that stuff. You can't actually push tar sands through a pipeline. So what they do is they dilute it with chemicals, who knows what, they don't have to tell you, of course. And it becomes what they call diluted bitumen, B-I-T-U-M-E-N. It goes by the shorthand of dilbit. And that's what they push through the pipeline. They're all the way, that blue line, to Superior, Wisconsin, right there at the, just to the west end of the UP. And at that point, the pipelines split. And the one pipeline that goes south to Chicago, they name these things, that one's called Line 6B, and that one does carry the tar sands that are, some of them are refined in Chicago. Some of that oil then continues on toward Detroit, where there's another refinery. And it was that line, 6B, that ruptured near Marshall, Michigan in the Kalamazoo River. And as you heard Beth Wallace say, almost 1 million gallons there. It leaked for 17 hours, and they're still cleaning it up. It's been over $1 billion of cleanup. So that was really Michigan's first exposure to, oh wow, we had pipelines. The other pipeline is the one that we're here talking about today. It's called Line 5, and it heads across the UP, under the Straits of Mackinac, through the Lower Peninsula, and stops at Marysville, just south of Port Huron, where it crosses again under the St. Clair River, and goes to Sarnia, where there's refineries in Canada. Now that pipeline, according to Enbridge, which is the corporation that operates the pipeline, Enbridge says that hasn't carried tar sands oil, and they don't intend for it to carry tar sands oil, although they don't have to tell us if they change their mind. They're just telling us that up until now it's just heavy crude oil that goes through that pipeline. So that's the basic geography of the pipelines and of what they tell us. Now, there was another point I wanted to make about that, but a couple other things. So, I know, the main point is, if you notice, so that pipeline, Line 5, there's no refining of that oil in Michigan. We basically are just a pass-through. They just run that oil through our state, but not just through our state, but through our Great Lakes. So we are essentially absorbing the risk, and they're getting all the profit. It's all coming from Canada, and it's going back to Canada. So we'll come back to this in a little bit, but one of the reasons that we thought that we should be talking to the governor of Michigan was to say, this seems like a really bad deal. Why are we taking the risk of our Great Lakes, our tourism economy, and all the other things that we value of the Great Lakes, and we're not getting much for it? And we can talk a little about what we are getting. So that's why Line 5 seems really important. The second big picture thing that here, you'll notice, they don't show Keystone XL, but the idea for Keystone is that it's going to run right down the center of, through Nebraska and right down toward the Gulf of Mexico, where they want to have it connected to refineries in Texas and then be able to be shipped out internationally through tankers. And if you haven't heard about Keystone XL, you've probably not been paying attention. But that pipeline may not happen, and you know that the oil companies are preparing for that. So a big part of their strategy with or without Keystone XL, is to increase their ability to take tar sands oil through these other pipelines. They're right now trying to get a pipeline over to the Pacific. British Columbia is not having any part of it right now. They're saying we don't want any more pipelines through British Columbia. But they're also looking at this existing system. It's called the Lakehead system, where it comes through the Great Lakes area. You know, they're saying we don't want to put tar sands through there, but they can do whatever they want with these pipelines. And if you kind of just figure what they might do if there's no Keystone XL, it stands to reason they may well be putting tar sands oil through there. And the difference, just to kind of bring you again back to the video, was that the gentleman from the Kalamazoo River Watershed Council was describing the difference is that tar sands oil sinks. And once it sinks to the bottom, try cleaning up a tar sand spill that's at the bottom of the Mackinac Straits, which get to 400 feet deep, I think, between the towers. So it's a different kind of disaster. I mean, a floating oil spill is a problem, but we have some technologies to contain those with booms. But a sinking oil spill might be there for years and years, or maybe you can't ever clean it up. So that's why tar sands matters. Yeah.
I was just wondering, this is the first I heard about this pipeline running through the UP. Is this, I'm assuming it's a buried pipeline?
Yeah.
And is there any way of knowing exactly where that is?
Well, that gets to, one of the other issues is they don't really want people to know where these are, because there is some public safety concerns. They don't want people, doing anything to make it rupture, which could happen. But you can find, most of it you can find on maps. And there are, stay away. Maybe some of you have seen where the...
Well, I believe it when the Kinchlow Air Force Base was there, they had a pipeline, and I believe that's part of the system.
Okay.
But
It goes through Rudyard.
It does go through Rudyard? Okay.
That's that's gas line going through Rudyard.
Is it? It's gas?
Yeah. Oil's going south and the gas is broke off of that. There's also a gas line under the streets.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Separate line?
Separate line. There's
For
two of
natural
them.
gas. This one is two pipelines. I know this oil pipeline, they split it. It's one pipeline until it gets to the Straits, and then they did split it into these two 20-inch lines. So, yeah.
Is there some reason for the two routes besides additional capacity and redundancy, because they're the same distance and they're going to the same place?
Well, they don't. They stop in Chicago and do some refining there, and they also do refining in Detroit. And there are other pipelines. These are the main lines, so they do send some of it, as you can see, from Chicago in other directions. But I can't explain exactly why they are configured the way they are. I just know that this is their major pipeline network.
What is the life expectancy of that pipeline?
Well, they're 60 years old. They'll tell you, Enbridge will tell you that, hey, we check these things. They're safe for a long time. They're real secure. I haven't heard what the life,
that word.
I don't know.
why did all these other pipelines break that were mentioned?
Yeah, well, they were about 60 years old. The one in Kalamazoo was about the same age, so they will rupture. Yeah.
How frequently do they inspect the pipeline, particularly through the Mackinac Straits?
Yeah, I wanted to talk just a little about inspection. And again, Beth Wallace she's been working on this longer and knows a lot of these things. You couldn't get her, so you got me, sorry. But I'll tell you what I know. Who monitors and who regulates pipelines, because they are, interstate and in fact international, it's not a state issue. It's a federal issue. It's actually a part of the United States Department of Transportation called the Pipeline, it's PHMSA, Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Act, I guess, PHMSA. I think it's an agency, it must be. That's who regulates it, that's who Enbridge, basically reports to, and there's very little transparency as far as when do they monitor, what do they find. It's, think about the depths of the US DOT and how you might try to find out anything about these pipelines. And they don't have to tell you. They tell PHMSA, and PHMSA says it's safe. So that's one of the major concerns, and why we're talking again to Snyder is we think we deserve to know a little bit more. We need more transparency. So yeah, go
What
ahead.
kind of currents are there through the Straits area?
Strong, I don't know. I mean, there is, I don't know, you're asking some good questions.
Lake Michigan, and Lake Huron.
There is a current.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
Current through
yeah,
there.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Let me show this other video real quick, because it's pretty. Oh, here's one other thing on this page that I'll show you. Nice little graphic that the National Wildlife Federation did here. It might be a little hard to see, but that's the Straits. And they're basically trying to show a simulation of how far a spill would likely travel. If there was a 3-hour spill, if it took them 3 hours to shut off the pipeline, that would be the closest black line there, or how far this would go in that's how far it would go in 3 hours. 6 hours and then 12 hours. So basically that's how quickly the oil would likely spread. So that's kind of a scary thing to look at. Now, if you want to actually see the pipelines, this is the footage here, and there is no audio anyway, so I'll just show you the footage. NWF sent somebody down earlier this year, and you can see one of the pipelines on the bottom.
So nice and shiny.
Yeah. So Enbridge, those broken supports, Enbridge said, oh, those were just part of construction. They weren't necessary. But there is a spot here coming up where you can see that the pipeline is suspended. It's not resting on the ground, which makes you a little nervous about currents. And Enbridge was there while they were diving, keeping an eye on them. So there it is again, and they didn't get, all the way across. I know they don't have footage of the whole thing. They talked about wanting to go back and do this again.
Jim, do you know how big around those pipes are?
These are 20 inches here. I think the main pipe is 36 inches, and then it splits into two 20-inch pipes. So yeah, here's the place where and this is with a different camera, so it's a little bit fuzzy. So anyway, I don't think there's too much more footage, but if you want to, if you want to imagine what it really looks like down there, there it is. There's the unsupported pipeline. You can kind of see how it comes out of this debris, and there's nothing underneath it. So you think about, maybe a long anchor cable or something like that could snag on that. I mean, there's all kinds of opportunities for disaster with a pipeline like that.
Do you know at what depth that footage was taken?
I don't.
I think it was relatively recently. I think it was this summer.
That they took it? Yeah, I think the footage was from this year, but you asked about the depth.
Yeah, how deep it was.
Oh,
They weren't in between the towers. There's kind of a canyon there between the towers that gets to be over 300 feet deep, 350. They weren't there, I know that. They were shallow water.
When you talk about response time and such, in the winter, when it's frozen, that's a whole nother picture. How do they deal with anything when the lake's frozen?
So, I can't speak to the emergency safety plan, what happens if there's a spill. When we were doing the rally, we contacted the media trying to get attention, raising awareness, and they did interview the St. Ignace Fire Department. And not to disparage the St. Ignace Fire Department, but I don't think this was probably what they were training for. And they basically said, oh yeah, we've heard all about this, we're covered, we got it.
Yeah, right.
I mean, even if there was a leak, how would the chain of command go to shut the pipeline down? Or no one know that either?
Yeah, well, what the story that Beth Wallace tells about the pipeline rupture in the Kalamazoo River, and you heard a little bit of it here, but is that they do have monitoring that detects changes in pressure. So if there's a leak, you would expect they could see a change in pressure. And the alarms did go off. It basically in somewhere in Canada, wherever they're headquartered, over in Edmonton, I think. And essentially, the staff there in Edmonton overrode the alarm, said, oh, that can't really be a leak, it must be something else. And so they let this alarm keep going for up to 17 hours. And it wasn't until somebody that actually was on the ground, as she said, a utility person, smelled the oil and knew to call Enbridge and said, hey, your pipe is really leaking, that they shut it off. So some of it is human error. There is technology. You know, in an ideal world, that pipeline would just shut off automatically if there were a leak, and you could minimize the amount of oil that would ever get into the lakes. But that's in an ideal world. So
I think that's one of the issues is they get a lot of false alarms. And, you know, pretty soon it's, well, you know, just another ignore it kind of thing.
So if I could move, I mean, I can try to answer more of the pipeline technical questions. I don't know a heck of a lot more than what I've told you. But what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit more about where we are now politically with as far as strategy and what groups are doing to at least address the threat that we do know about. And I would like to kind of go back to what you heard McKibben say in the video, which is, as we started this rally, and the groups that really came to this were climate groups, climate change groups that were concerned primarily about tar sands oil not spilling, at least not into the lakes, but spilling into the air. Because the concern for climate activists is this is really some of the most carbon dioxide intensive stuff to burn. And so we should be concerned about, you know, making that a primary source of energy. When you think about the risk that we all think about when you look at a pipeline under the Great Lakes, you immediately say, well, we should do something to fix that so that it doesn't leak, and we should. But one of the other parts of a strategy that from the climate concern is, well, the minute that you say, let's strengthen those pipelines, replace those pipelines, you've essentially told Enbridge, go ahead and put anything you want through there. So now you can put tar sands because, you know, they've fixed it. They've done everything, and they can afford many millions of dollars of repair or replacement because, you know, they're spending $1 billion on a cleanup in the Kalamazoo River right now. So there is a bit of a strategy question that is being debated. What do you want? Do you want the pipelines replaced, or do you really want them removed? And removing them is a big challenge in that, frankly, there's not a lot of support even from a lot of the environmental groups, because that challenge, you know, now you're taking on the entire oil and gas industry. So this, I'm just telling you, this is a real challenge. You know, what do you want? Do you just want to replace them and then have them continue to be pumping whatever they want to pump under the Great Lakes and feel like it's safer, or do you want to really address the problem? And I'm telling you, I have my opinion. Who we're working with, I'll give you the rest of the group. So you know that National Wildlife Federation wrote the report, and Beth Wallace remains very involved, as does NWF. Not just on Line 5, but they're really a lead organizer with other groups on Keystone and the national pipeline system. So NWF is a major player. Here in Michigan, so the Michigan Land Use Institute got involved because of the climate concerns in the local group. And the Michigan Environmental Council, which is an ally of ours we work closely with, they are based in Lansing, and they have a lot of lobbying power within the state government. So those three organizations have really been kind of at the center of the idea that is what is also over here, and I just want to make sure we talk about this. So at the time of the rally, we recognized we didn't just want to raise awareness, we wanted to do something about it. And so we quickly came up with a strategy that we're still thinking about, which was a two-part petition. And we thought, well, who should we be targeting? You know, PHMSA, this dark bureaucratic agency of the DOT, is really who's in charge of regulating the pipeline. But how do you get a hold of PHMSA and tell them anything from northern Michigan? So we picked Governor Snyder, who actually has virtually no regulatory authority. This is a federal issue. The state of Michigan has no authority. However, as you know, the top political official in the state of Michigan, if you're concerned about the Great Lakes, you should be talking to Governor Snyder, because he could influence federal policy. So our approach was to develop a petition targeting Governor Snyder and asking for two things. Replace the pipelines because of the concern of a leak, and promise that there will never be, pledge that there will not allow tar sands to ever go through that pipeline because of the risk of tar sands. So we have a petition over here on the table that we have not yet delivered to the governor. We have a meeting set in 2 weeks with the governor's office where we're going to talk about this. Let them know that currently we have over 3,000 signatures. We're still trying to raise more. So I brought extra copies, and if y'all are interested and motivated, I would encourage you to try to get some more signatures. We're planning to deliver these to the governor, talking to his top energy official on December 4th with MEC, NWF, and NWR, with the hope that we can at least get the governor's attention to talk about the replacement issue. We don't expect that he'll be at all interested in keeping out tar sands, but we'll bring that up as well. So that's the immediate thing. What we plan to do is to do a media event, press event in probably the Detroit area where there hasn't been a lot of coverage, where we will deliver the petitions, at least on camera, try to make a show that there are thousands of people, especially mostly all from up north, that are deeply concerned about this pipeline. We at MLUI are planning to put an editorial in the Detroit Free Press in the next few weeks when we can get it to run that will talk about the risk of these pipelines. And not only the Mackinac line, but we're going to talk about the fact that it also goes under the St. Clair River, which is not that many miles upstream from where the city of Detroit gets its drinking water. So if you're not worried about the Straits of Mackinac, you might want to worry about the same pipeline going under the St. Clair River. And we expect that those, thinking about both of those should get the governor's attention, at least to start talking to Enbridge about replacement. So we are doing those things here in the next month or so, trying to raise more awareness downstate, where we just got, we got a little bit of attention when we did this rally. We did get on Michigan Public Radio. We had some coverage in newspapers around the state, but it was what I would say a blip. I doubt there's many people in southern Michigan that really even have any idea about these pipelines still. So those are the immediate strategies. Now, again, there's these pipeline activists that are, many of the national groups are still all focused on Keystone XL, but there are many of those groups that are starting to look at the strategies of, well, what do we do to make sure that the pipeline companies have as their backup strategy coming through these existing pipelines. So we are beginning to see some support for how do they help us organize around the concerns of these pipelines. Yeah.
Is there anything at all going on in the immediate Straits area, St. Ignace, Mackinac City, Lachenau area? Is there any core
groups? You mean organizing groups?
I mean,
I'd say they're sitting here probably if there is.
Well, one thing would seem, I understand the other efforts, and I think they're all great. My thinking on this locally is there are people here interested. I think possibly one of the target groups would be businessmen in the area.
Yeah.
If I were the owners of the Grand Hotel and I thought about this, I would see this as tremendous business risk. If I was any one of the ferry company owners, just think, I mean, all you have to do is see what happened in the Gulf, and everything, business, it goes to hell. And that goes up the chain. It gets to the local lumberyard, the local hardware store, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. So I would be interested personally in joining with anybody here locally who might be interested in pulling something together that would target the business community and get them, because we have a Republican administration who pays attention to business people. And if we get business people excited, then I think we have another potential route to the governor's office on this.
You know, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you're from Lake Chanel.
Yeah, I'm from Lake Chanel. You're from Lake Chanel?
Yes, yeah.
I'm Bob Dunn and Chris Brumley. We're both on the Lake Chanel Islands Watershed Council, and this is one of 3 top items that is coming on our agenda now. And I was telling Jim earlier, I think you struck the tip of the iceberg last summer by having the rally at the Bridgeview. Maybe if we took this nucleus of the people that are now aware of it, the 400 that attended, and we go and have that rally again next summer, make it an all-day thing, Lake Chanel would probably be able to help support some of that, whether it was at Bridgeview or in Lake Chanel, but I think strategically having it right there where the pipeline is a good place to have it. We could take that 400 people and turn it into 4,000 people if we promote it right, and like you say, the Grand Hotel, the freight lines, the Shepler's, Arnold line, and spiral it out from there, that we would get a strong nucleus. 3,000, I don't know if Governor Snyder's gonna wink at that. We've been trying to have a meeting with him on low water and the giving our water resource away downstream, and we've, we're 20,000 members strong in a group called Restore Our Water, and we can't get the governor's attention. And the word we're getting now back from a friend of the governor is, well, he's got 2 things on his platter right now. One is the bankruptcy of Detroit. Second one is his re-election. And after he's re-elected, he will address things such as low water and stuff. I'm hoping you have more success getting his ear before the election.
One idea, speaking to the second issue, is that we've also heard from the Mark Schauer, who is the Democratic candidate running against Snyder, who seems to be very interested in talking about this, which, you know, if it becomes an issue in the campaign, then Snyder's going to also have to address it, and he has the opportunity to do something about it. If he wants to do something about it to get reelected, you know, that's good for all of us. So,
have you ever thought of a transit tax on the oil that goes through it?
you know, that's a really great question. There's a group, a climate group called Citizens Climate Lobby. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this group, but it's an organization that's around, it's a national organization that's talking about a carbon tax. Essentially, it's that idea of how do you...
I was just looking at like that particular pipeline, since it goes through the whole, just the state of Michigan.
Right.
If you could get it at the state level versus having to go to the feds.
Right, if there could be a state...
Better chance of success on that, just to shut that arm of it off.
Yeah, part of this op-ed that we're going to put in the Free Press, we did ask Enbridge. We just asked them straight up, how much money does Michigan get from this pipeline?
Yeah, I'd like to know that.
Well, for the two pipelines, they gave us the numbers for line 5 and line 6B, not the refinery in Detroit, but the two pipelines. All told, they say there's $22 million in payroll for their pipeline operation, all of them in Michigan, and another, was it 18? It was 46 million total for their both payroll and property and sales tax that they pay to Michigan every year. So, you know, not a tiny amount. I'm sure they inflated it. We let them use their numbers. But you compare that even to like the value of, you know, what is...
That's nothing.
That's nothing. So putting that number out there and says, you know, how come Michigan's not getting a little more for the risk? It seems like a very valid question. Yeah.
Has the Chamber of Commerce weighed in on this? I'd be interested to see what their
The
view would
state
be.
chamber?
state or even the local chambers, St. Ignace and Mackinac City. It seems like that would be something that, if you could get the chamber on the side, that would influence Snyder.
You know, the local chambers, I think that's a great idea, and frankly, it would be best if we had some local groups that could help. I wasn't real encouraged when we were trying to organize the rally. I went to both St. Ignace and Mackinac and didn't get much support when I told them what we were doing, that we were doing a rally about an oil pipeline under the Straits. There was no interest from the chamber. Now, maybe it was just a busy time of year, which it probably was. But it's a good question, but I will tell you, you probably all know, it's a typical response to say, hey, it's just another business out there and we trust them. You know, they say it won't leak.
They were very supportive of the Mascoma project, which would have been devastating to the forest and to the air and to the water. They were in support.
You know, I just want to make a couple comments that are pretty broad, but a couple things. I mean, this is really a watershed time in the world. You know, you're talking about climate change and you see it happening all over the world. That's one thing. But we need to realize that corporations have grown into unethical beings. That's the wrong word for sure, but unethical practices. And one of the things that they traditionally do is withhold information. I mean, you can't get it. And what they have done throughout our country is they have changed the local laws and the state laws so they're all in their favor. So the laws are really against the environmentalists. And that's what happens. Even if you work together, you come right up against the fact that you can't sue them. I mean, you just can't. So it comes down to realizing that corporations, when our country was founded, had to enhance the neighborhood. I mean, that's what they were scared of corporations. Corporations, they put limitations on corporations. They could only make so much profit. They couldn't combine. They couldn't, all of those have been broken and changed state by state. And we didn't realize it, but they have been. So they got us in a big corner as far as like doing something like tar sands, which is, we love oil, right? We love our cars, we like our boats, it's a powerful thing. But we just have to accept the fact, Rogers told us time after time, that it is coming to a tipping point. But we could at least use good oil. And we could definitely stop using as much oil. Like, just look at plastic. I mean, couldn't we do things? But anyway, it's the idea of what corporations do not have power that we don't give them. People have the power. People gave them, we didn't know it, we weren't aware. We gave them the right to take the right of a person, and they're not a person. So Bill McKibben on the West Coast, one of my friends told me that he called upon all the people with white hair, and he said, you know, you need to step over the line at this time in history. You need to stand up for something. And in the case of the Mackinac Straits, I think what we need to stand up for is water. I mean, water is life-giving to everything. The trees, the plants, the little beings, us. It's life-giving. Worldwide, it's a disaster. Everybody's going to want our water. If you have water that has this little bitty inch all across it, it doesn't take very much oil to spread. I mean, so who protects the Great Lakes? We do. And it's really going to be up to us to show up and stand up and talk. Even if it's poorly done, we need to show up. And the only thing that I saw at the Straits that I would have liked to see would be just straight people. Scare the pants off them. I mean, just scare them and say, not that we're against you, it's just that you have to be for life. If you can't do this, we need water. Who wants to drink water with all the poisons that are in it? So I think what I just want to say is we have the power. not corporations. And we can take it back. And we can say how they will use it. It matters more than we think. And secondly, this is about water up here. And it's about clean soil and good food. So I just wanted to mention those things. I want to encourage us to use your own ideas. And also, let's let the little kids see adults write in the newspaper and talk about our water and our soil. Because they've had a different life than we had. We are the ones that saw the wild lands and the fresh water. We are the ones that could drink from the streams. No, along those lines.
You know, Enbridge, you're talking about a corporation, this pipeline company. It's just a pipeline corporation. There's of course other corporations that refine the oils and, you know, extract the oils. But Enbridge is a Canadian company, corporation. But most of these corporations that you're talking about are international anyway, and most of our laws are now saying all corporations are equal. So, but it does seem that, you know, we need to talk about the fact that there's real risk from this, that this corporation is benefiting from, and they're making billions of dollars, and they're not risking their own money. They're risking our lakes. So it is, I think, you know, this is touching a nerve differently than what you'll typically see. People do appreciate that this is our water. So I think your sentiment is right on, and this is an issue that does seem to resonate with a lot of folks. I did want to say one other thing about the local organizing. I think that is what we need to do. We do need to kind of continue to band together. This is a Sierra-sponsored event. Are there other groups that Sierra works with? You know, how broad is the net that we can reach out to here in the Eastern UP?
Well, these gentlemen said they're with the Les Chenaux watershed.
Les Chenaux, okay.
We do have a watershed group here that's trying to do something with the Ashman Creek watershed in the Sioux, and certainly we can present some information to them, see if they would get on board.
On my way back to Traverse City tomorrow, I'm going to be stopping at Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council, which I imagine some of you are familiar with them. They're
regulations.
Yeah, they're very interested. Their last newsletter put this on the front of their newsletter, so I was pleased to see that.
What group was that?
Called Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council. It's kind of Charlevoix, Petoskey to Mackinac. So there is some organizing interest. There's some folks there in that area that had talked about an event or a series of events next summer, really targeting businesses and trying to do a tour, maybe a series of events where we go to business places and bring this message, because that is, I think, part of, we may not get all the business associations, but we will definitely find business owners that see the risk. And I think we just have to go to the people that will speak up, because I'm not highly optimistic that we're going to get chambers to just jump on. This is a little bit too political for a lot of those.
But maybe having a strategy session, like what are the businesses that do have more influence and more to lose?
Right, the high profile.
I like that map that you had that showed 3 hours, 6 hours, 12 hours.
Yeah, how many businesses are in that somewhere in there? There's an awful lot. Right?
What website are those?
That was in this report.
Oh, it's in the report.
The Sunken
Okay.
Hazard report, yeah.
That raises a question about Beth Wallace's article, anything that's been published.
Published, yeah.
What's,
if
as groups or individuals say we wanted to make copies, is there a restriction, any restriction on?
No, I just didn't feel like making as many. I'm hoping you can all get a copy online. But yeah, you're welcome to use it. Absolutely.
They want help.
Yeah, she's happy to have it out there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about more tribal involvement, since the water
I'm glad you brought that up.
Lifeblood of Michigan?
I met yesterday with the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa, which are in the Traverse City area. The Little Traverse Bay Band came to an event that we did in Traverse City. The Little River Band, which is from further south down by Manistee, has had interest. I think that could be very important because the tribe, some of the treaties deal with the Great Lakes waters and may give them some legal authority that we may not all have. We have to try to go to PHMSA, which is a federal agency, but the tribes have some jurisdiction that we don't necessarily. I mean, we have authority, but man, we got a lot of bureaucracy to get through, and they can go right from the top. And frankly, they know how to use their authority. So I think that could be a useful partnership.
The state doesn't have regulatory authority, but is there anyone in the state that has oversight responsibility to see that the regulators are in fact doing what they should be doing?
The Department of Environmental Quality has some interest in this issue. There is the possibility that the state could try to take over some regulatory authority from the federal government. Some states, there's only a couple states apparently that do that, and that may not even be a better solution, frankly. I'm not sure that the state of Michigan...
Where have you found so far that everybody in the state shrugs their shoulders and says, not my job?
Well, we haven't been to the governor's office yet. That's 2 weeks. We'll be interested. I'm not holding my breath, but I think we need to go to everybody.
What are some of the objectives when meeting with state officials here in a few weeks?
Well, the petition, and I talked to you about the challenge. The petition says two things: keep tar sands out of Line 5, out of the Mackinac line, and replace that line under the straits.
With any kind of specifications, like double walled pipes
we did this
on one side or the other?
I think that's where we'd get the engineers involved. Obviously, if they're going to replace it, they need to replace it in a way that is as safe as
we know
possible.
where their shut-off control, I mean, if there's something happens under the straits, are they shutting it off 100 miles or 200 miles away? Are they shutting it off right there on the shore?
That's a great question. I don't know.
There was an article here recently that said, which surprised me, this, it was in the Great Lakes Echo.
Yeah.
It did say there are shutoffs on either side.
Right.
Now, I don't know what that means.
Where they
I don't
are
know whether that's like just slam shut, or who knows?
Right.
Who knows what that means?
And then if they shut it off, and how long does it take them? I mean, those are... I'm sure there's technical solutions that could minimize the risk. Then the question is, are there human overrides, and how do we know that it's really going to work?
So, in other words, we really should know, what are their plans? What is the process? Where is it? Who gets involved?
Has there been any serious consideration of replacement, or is this just a pie-in-the-sky idea?
I'll tell you, here's something I didn't share that I learned just the other day as I was doing a little research for this Detroit Free Press story. I looked more into the pipeline under the Port Huron River, because I hadn't heard anything about that, and it seemed like a big deal. Enbridge, just after the Kalamazoo River leak rupture, they decided of their own volition to replace the pipeline under the Port Huron. There at Port Huron. And the reason in the newspaper article said they discovered a dent in the pipeline. The pipeline was dented, so they decided to replace it. Now that's a much shorter, that's less than a mile across that river. I don't know how many millions of dollars it cost them to replace that, but they did it. So it's not, I think it's entirely feasible that Enbridge would replace this line without a lot of pressure. The question is that how much of a solution is that?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I happen to be one of those that don't think you're going to get rid of them. I mean, that a realistic thing, I think, is replacement, personally. But on this whole question, should it be replaced? This was built in 1953. This was the technology in automobiles in 1953. Right here. It seems pretty obvious that it's time to replace this thing.
Now, you know, one other issue we haven't talked about, but folks at Michigan Environmental Council brought up is, you know, what got our attention first was the eruption in the Kalamazoo River. It was actually a creek that fed right into the Kalamazoo River. And we're talking about the Straits of Mackinac for obvious reasons, but that pipeline goes from the Straits of Mackinac to Port Huron, and it crosses an awful lot of rivers and lakes along the way. So, you know, yeah, we care a lot about the Great Lakes, but all the other inland waterways that go into the Great Lakes are also at risk from that pipeline. So when we talk about will Enbridge replace the pipeline under the Straits, yeah, I think they do it just because of the political pressure and looking like they want to do the right thing. But are they going to replace the whole pipeline? And should they? You know, because a Kalamazoo River spill in the Ausable River would be a pretty big disaster for the trout fishery. I mean, you think about Douglas Lake and all the lakes that it goes through in the UP. I mean, it's a disaster everywhere. So that's the issue. Isn't really just the Straits. That's just the one that we can all imagine, and we just saw the.
Well, if you've ever, I'm sure a lot of you have been at the Blue Water Bridge at Lake Huron, or the end, and you can see how fast the current is there.
It's very fast.
Pipeline under there breaking would, I mean, it would, that chart would have it down Detroit in 3 hours.
You had a comment?
Yeah, we're talking about the rivers, you got the headwaters of the Pigeon in that too.
Pigeon River Country, Sturgeon River,
Black River.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where the
because that pipeline crosses east of Vanderbilt.
Okay. So, you know, the issue is it's easy to get focused on the Straits of Mackinac and how we just have to replace it and then we can all breathe a sigh of relief. But I think we need to, you know, keep thinking about what's going on at the global scale. This is connected to a much bigger system than just that little 5 mile stretch across the Straits. There's a lot more going on here.
I mean, your ultimate goal here is to shut it down. I mean, that's what it should be.
I think you know, humanity should be working toward.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Cleaner
The ultimate
fuel,
goal here is to leave them tar sands where they're at.
Yeah, that would be ideal.
Well, I'm just saying, I mean, this is all interlinked.
Yep. That's why we
It's
talked
just a
about
matter-
tar sands. No tar sands through this line. That would be a start. You know, can we put a moratorium on saying we'll never allow tar sands through this line? Because they're saying there are none now.
If you had local groups in all the little 5 mile places or however many miles, it would add up.
Yeah. So, you know, we talked about Snyder. He's the target for this petition, which was, I will admit, somewhat arbitrary. We had to do it hastily. You know, Representative Benishek makes a little bit more sense because he is your congressional, you know, legislator. They need to hear it. You know, they need to hear it. They need to hear it. They need to be able to say, you know, I have been hearing from people. So, same with the state senators. You know, Levin and Stabenow need to hear that this is an issue. We've seen people have written Levin and they've been getting letters back. I've read them. They're kind of a form letter that says, gee, this is a concern, but we have PHMSA and they regulate these pipelines, and, you know, kind of a pat answer that doesn't really, it was a little bit of a brush off. So I think the more they hear, the more they'll at least know they have to address this.
What about contacting PHMSA or?
I don't know how, bureaucracies like that are really tough to reach. You really need to go through this is my opinion. You know, I don't know who the head of PHMSA is, and I doubt that they would be very moved. They're not political, you know, they're not elected by the people. They get paid to do a job, and they're just going to keep doing it until somebody tells them to do it differently. So,
who's telling them?
well, that would be Congress, or the president, or, you know.
Part of the executive.
Who tells them? Right.
Yeah, so there you go. Follow the line.
What type of contact have we made directly with Enbridge?
Well, we've talked to, I believe they were at the rally, quietly. We talked to them, you know.
I mean, I asked that from the standpoint that recently there's been a conversation about the 10,000 acres that the DNR owns that you've got a company interested in purchasing a Star limestone quarry, and recently they hosted a meeting, and then they asked the government officials to attend at that and invited the public to come to start having a conversation about it. So I wonder, as your groups start to reach out, instead of going after the legislative end, maybe you should just work direct with Enbridge and help them to avert a public relations nightmare by working with you.
Right.
The other issue that you just brought up that really hit home to me is if you started on the west end of the UP and you counted up all your waterways all the way down to Detroit, and instead of, when you promote even this meeting, instead of saying, we're worried about this pipeline going under the Mackinac Bridge, but say, I'm worried about this pipeline that crosses X number of Michigan
these
waterways,
rivers, yeah.
I think you're gonna get more people interested.
That's true. It's true. You know, I should say also, because we asked about what do we know about Enbridge. They are in the process of replacing Line 6B, which is the one that, the entire Line 6B from Chicago to Detroit. Now, they're not only replacing it, but they're increasing the capacity greatly because they're intending to put more tar sands oil through it. So they're getting, you know, they are replacing it. They might be happy to replace Line 5, but they might also want to expand the capacity and be able to take tar sands. So this again comes to this, you know, what is it that we want? I think we could go to Enbridge and say, you know, replace the line. They replace these lines eventually. It's 60 years old. I think they've gotten their money out of it. They probably have a plan for replacing it at some point. The question is, do we want them to expand it? Do we want to allow anything through there? Those are some of the bigger questions that...
Well, I mean, if they're already replacing 6B, it's like, what you need to go for is the jugular to remove it. Build enough capacity to haul it all around Chicago.
That's why I was asking why they had two lines.
Why do they need this one at all?
Yeah.
Well, the question I have is if they're putting a bigger emphasis on the pipeline 6 because they want to run tar sands, 5 comes off of 6, right?
They both come out of Superior, so that's a different...
Probably called something further up.
Superior, Wisconsin.
How do they not run tar sands through 5 then? I mean, where's the good oil coming from? Because they're running tar
North
sands.
Dakota. That Bakken, I think it's called, the Bakken oil in North Dakota is oil,
right?
Not tar sands oil. So there is U.S. oil that comes. How they keep it all separate and split it and where it all comes from, you know, there's a massive pipeline network. We're only looking at the big ones.
I think when you see one line on
Yeah,
it,
that's very misleading.
Yeah.
There's a huge number of pipelines, and they bring, you know. In fact, they do say that in Line 5, it's not just oil from North Dakota. They do add oil from Michigan, and even in some cases, they carry natural gas through that pipeline. So, you know, they can mix things and then pull it apart. I am no petro engineer, that's for sure. But I think they know what they're doing.
So can you read the wording on the petition for us again?
Thank you. I will read it to you. You can grab, there's extra copies over there, and then I'll tell you where else
Is the
you can
petition
find it.
available online or no?
It is. This started out, thank you, I kind of neglected this a little bit. There is a change.org. It's a website that you can do all kinds of petitions. It was the quickest way we could get this thing done. So if you looked up, you know, Enbridge pipeline, oil and water don't mix, any number of keywords, you would find this petition on change.org. And then we also have print copies, and we've been gathering those as well. So that's where you could find it. It says, Governor Rick Snyder, keep tar sands out of the Great Lakes, replace the Enbridge pipeline. We urge you to demand that our federal government provide fail-safe protection of the Great Lakes and their tributaries, the largest freshwater system on Earth, from toxic oil pipeline spills. To accomplish this, federal authorities must first require Enbridge Energy to immediately remove and replace its aging 60-year-old Mackinac line, Line 5, a disaster waiting to happen in the Straits of Mackinac, with the safest, most up-to-date pipeline technology available, including aggressive monitoring and shut-off controls. Fully fund proper spill remediation measures and provide publicly transparent permitting information. And second, permanently forbid all transport of tar sands oil, i.e. diluted bitumen or dilbit, by tankers or through the Mackinac line. Tankers is another issue because we know freighters will carry this stuff as well. Or through the Mackinac line or any other pipeline in close proximity to the Great Lakes or its tributaries, because submerged tar sands oil spills cannot be properly cleaned up. So that's what the petition says to the governor. We tried to address a lot of the issues that we've raised here. It talks about tributaries. It mostly focuses on just replacing the line under the Mackinac Straits. But it's also just the beginning of a conversation that we hope will, continue with a lot more groups having a lot more voices.